It's really fun to be here. First of all, before I jump in, I just want to say what an amazing job Jim's doing. It's really it's an honor to have him back doing this. When we started this, I couldn't have imagined a room like this, and I couldn't be more excited to have Jim doing this. People have been asking me all day, like, well, what are you doing now? And what I want to talk about for the next 20 minutes is a large part of what I'm working on next. So I think Bob did a really nice job this morning setting up the sort of interest in generative AI, why people are really excited about it, right? So I just want to kind of build on that for a moment, right? So I think people know this, but maybe not the order of magnitude here. Like, we've never had an application go 0 to 100 million users at the rate that ChatGPT has. And it really changed how lots of people thought about it, right? So you have people like Larry Ellison saying things like what Bob said this morning. I also think it's interesting to look at how it's changed how computer scientists are looking at the field. So this is a database of basically all the pre-publications of computer science journals. So you can go to archive.org and you can look at what are researchers right now in the process of getting ready to publish. And one of the things I think that's interesting is basically when ChatGPT came out, all of a sudden, all the papers on topics like large language models just exploded, right? We went from about a paper every other day to 8 papers a day. Right? So it just gives you a sense on, like, you walk across the street to SCS, like, people are really, really excited about this generative AI technology and what it can do for you. It also turns out executives are really excited about this, right? So this is a survey by, I think, Jeff, should I say a second-tier consulting firm? How do I frame this with Deloitte as a sponsor? But you've probably heard of KPMG as well. So KPMG went, they surveyed a bunch of executives, and they said, like, so how transformative do you think generative AI is going to be for your industry? And 65%, I think, accurately said, well, I think it's going to have an extremely high impact on my industry in the next 3 to 5 years. And part of me is wondering, like, well, what are the other 35% thinking? But I think the next statistic is actually the thing that kind of really brings this home to me, which is, so executives get really excited about generative AI. And then we say, okay, cool. Like, well, how many projects are you going to have in the next 1 to 2 years that are going to take advantage of this thing that's going to completely change your industry? And 60% say, oh, I don't have anything on the roadmap for at least a year to 2. And I think this tension, right, this, like, okay, it's amazing, it's going to change the world. I think a lot of this comes from, like, CEO sits down in front of ChatGPT, him or herself, and they start typing, and they, wow, this is kind of amazing. But then sometimes it gives them results that aren't so amazing, and they're just not exactly sure how to get started. And so we have this point in time, I think, where we're asking a really important question at the intersection of computer science and innovation, which is what we are really good at in this part of Carnegie Mellon here that you're in right now, which is, okay, what's the killer app for this generative AI thing? And the argument I want to make in the next kind of 17, 18 minutes here is, to me, the killer app for generative AI is going to be what most of the people in this room do, which is innovation. And I think if we, as the innovation leaders in our companies, can show our leadership, okay, here's how you use generative AI to deliver real business value, then we can also provide a kind of blueprint for the rest of knowledge workers, right? And this is not a new thing, by the way. So we've 4 or 5 times already this morning made this call back to the internet, like, oh, generative AI is kind of like the internet. Well, I mean, remember, there was a time where, like, the .com stuff, there's like an internet group. There's like, oh, that's the e-business group in an organization. I mean, it kind of seems crazy to us today, but we have precedent for, like, okay, crazy emerging technology, we'll show you how to use it. But given what I do, you would probably not expect me to have said, well, the killer app for generative AI is something else. Like, generally, I tend to think about innovation functions a lot. So let me kind of back up why I think this slide is true, and then I will finish with, as promised, but we ask all our faculty to do these hype versus reality talks, which is a kind of summary of what's hype and what's reality. given how hard I've pushed our colleagues to do this over the years, it would be sad if I didn't fulfill that as well. So I will finish with the standard hype versus reality thing. But just for a moment here, let's just think a little bit about why generative AI's killer app is going to be innovation. So Rebecca, who you had a chance to meet this morning and is one of my favorite collaborators on campus, and I think the 3 largest learning and development executive education programs we've done at Carnegie Mellon around AI, we've done together. So we get into trouble a lot on this. And if you rewind the clock 2 years ago, and we're in a large healthcare company, or we're working with Moderna or whatever, when we're sitting down with these people, this is what we would talk to them. We'd say, hey, when you want to think about machine learning, you want to go out and you want to look for problems that have one of 3 verbs. What are activities that you're doing where you're predicting, you're classifying, or you're clustering, right? So, this is a big prediction problem. Okay, well, we have this thing, machine learning. It's kind of like regression on steroids, or dirty secret. Sometimes it's just regression. But that we know how to do prediction really well with a lot of data, right? Or, we need to classify things. And so if you think about it, over the last 20 years, a lot of the really great business use cases of machine learning have been, where have companies gotten the most value doing predicting, classifying, and clustering? Dave's in the room, Dave's in the back there. When Dave and I started, Dave started the first company, and I kind of convinced him to let me come along with a similar sales pitch to Lou's story, for what it's worth. But when we started a company called Peak Strategy, right, we helped people predict stock prices, because it turns out one of the most valuable predictions that happen in a business function every day is a stock price going to go up or down? And billions and billions and billions of dollars now trade based on machine learning's ability to do that really well. So you can kind of think about, okay, well, what are the things that happen in an organization with a lot of predicting, classifying, and clustering? And that's been the roadmap for how we help organizations think about machine learning. But then about a year ago, something changed, right? And it's what we just talked about. People start using ChatGPT, and there's this really lots of excitement around this new type of machine learning. And it is worth saying, like, generative AI is just a new type of machine learning. This is still machine learning. I continue to say this. I don't love the fact that this says classic machine learning, because there's lots of low-hanging fruit still in predicting, classifying, and clustering. But there's this additional thing that we're doing now, which is generative AI. And generative AI added a 4th verb to the list. So now it's not predict, classify, and cluster. It's predict, classify, cluster, and create, right? That can be create new text, write me a job description. That can create images or videos. That can create specialized text. The sort of obvious example here is programming. If you haven't talked to your programmers about what Copilot is doing for what it means to be an engineer today, you should go have that conversation. But we can really think about that as just creating specialized text, right? So, and I think there's a lot more to come. But the point is, we now have 4 verbs instead of 3. And I think the question that's become really important in a business context over the last few months is, okay, so in prediction, things like sales forecasting, stock price forecasting, right? We found that the things that were on a effort to value place in an organization, where could you get a lot of value if you could do prediction better? So the question I think we should be asking ourselves, and I think frankly we're not asking ourselves enough right now, is, okay, well, what's the equivalent with the verb create? And to me, the answer on the verb create thing is, okay, it's basically innovation. And again, and sort of, this is good work from McKinsey. And for those of you who've been at the forum for 5 years, you know how hard it is for me to say all those words in the same sentence. But it is. It's good work from McKinsey. I didn't say other work was good. This is good work from McKinsey. But they did a really nice job earlier this year where they tried to look at, okay, what's the economic impact of generative AI on different functions? And a lot of the functions were what you would suspect, but this was the one I think that was good and sort of underappreciated, which is, okay, in R&D, across the entire R&D function, we think we can have a kind of 10 to 15% improvement in productivity or reduction in cost. Like this is, I mean, that's amazing, right? That's absolutely amazing. So not only is R&D like a good create function, it turns out generative AI is pretty good at this. And I think actually this will be the first time ever that this is true for a McKinsey study. I think they may have actually underestimated the impact of this. I suspect these numbers are going to be actually greater than we're saying there. And over the last few months, people are saying, like, what are you working on? This is what I'm working on. Like, I've been basically trying to spend time with folks like yourself, as well as traditional startups, trying to help understand how generative AI can support the entire innovation process. So from coming up with an idea, to validating an idea, to scaling up that idea. And so all the text that you see underneath those three buckets, we have done at least 2 experiments with the startup trying to use generative AI to do this and sort of build models to do this. I don't have time to like go through every single one of them today. I am in the process now of trying to put some of this out onto YouTube to like show how some of this stuff works. I will also say, and I know I'm working with some of you in the room and I don't have your permission to say that I'm working with you, so I won't say that, but I will say, if you want to kind of quickly see an example of this today, Neil Sony over there at Extivate, we have been doing some of this at Extivate as well, and you know he's got a slightly different situation than a Fortune 500 company, so he's happy to show you what we're working on, the prototypes that we're working on there. Okay, so again, this point is, like, I think we can do a lot better than 10 to 15% because the point is we can do it on all of these different categories, and this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, we have seen this movie before. This is important. We have seen this movie before, right? When you're talking about a dramatic improvement in the process of doing all these things, right? We've seen what happens to innovation and entrepreneurship when that happens. So 2005, 2006, 2007, 3 things happened at the same time that completely changed how we built startups. Right? Ruby on Rails made it a very different process to actually build things. All of a sudden, you went from having to write all of the functionality that you needed all at once to snapping components together to do it. And this concept of Ruby gems kind of changed what it meant at the early process, right? And then Amazon Web Services, I actually realized we've got Ed in the back of the room and Dave. So we've got multiple people who lived this with me for a while. So when we started MSpoke, they'll remember we spent 7 figures on servers, and they'll remember because they were on the board asking me, are you sure we need to spend 7 figures on servers? We did at that time. A couple years later, when we sold that business to LinkedIn, we had 0 servers and we had a $500 a month credit card bill. Right? The cloud wasn't just like this amazing thing for capability. It completely changed the cost structure of coming up with these new ideas. And then mobile computing, right? I would go and sit down with places like Verizon and try to convince them to do BD with us. If I'd come back with a 30-70 split where I was keeping 70%, you would have thought I was like the best business development person in the world. I was not. We did not get those deals. But the point is, it completely changed a lot of what the front end of innovation was. And it's hard in 2023 to remember this, but in the mid-2000s, this was absolutely transformational. But it didn't just change what you could do for building web startups, right? And this is the movie that's important here. It also changed how we actually funded and created startups, right? So, you know, right around the same time, Paul Graham, Brad Feld, Jim Jen, I should have put Alpha Labs logo up here, Jim, I'm sorry. But these guys started saying like, hey, it turns out like we can actually change how entrepreneurs think about funding their businesses. Instead of spending 6 months talking to idiots, I mean venture capitalists, I'm allowed to make that joke, I was a VC for a while, but talking to VCs for 6 months, right? We'll just have you build a prototype and actually then set up a room where a bunch of them are together and we can talk about it, right? So we changed like the whole funding model that supported entrepreneurship. And then Eric and Steve and other people basically came along and codified, okay, well, here's how you actually do this processes. Now, the important point here is what catalyzed all of this was web and mobile changes. But think about the portfolio of Y Combinator today, right? There are plenty of non-software companies in that portfolio. Think about the number of organizations that have tried to apply the lean startup. There are plenty of companies that have nothing to do with any of those tech trends on the beginning. But the point is, every once in a while, there's a technology that's so disruptive that it changes how startups are built. And it doesn't just do it for the kind of company that you originally think of. It does it for the whole field overall. And that's, I think, where we're heading with generative AI right now, right? We're heading to a point where it's going to completely change the processes behind how we're doing it. And I think, and now I do want to sort of move to this hype versus reality thing. Like, I do think when you're thinking about helping across these three steps, it's important to ask yourself, like, well, what's the right mental model to do this? And the right mental model, I've become convinced, is innovation groups, whether these are traditional startups or corporate startups like many of you in the room, you need to think about generative AI as your co-founder, right? Not the CEO, not the person who actually does the work, but as your co-founder, the collaborator. So someone who's adding extra perspectives to the brainstorming you're doing, who's automating a little bit of those routine cognitive tasks that you're doing. And actually the best analogy of this, and this has nothing to do with the fact that Eva's coming up next, this just is to me the best analogy to this. I just had a conversation, and we'll be having a podcast coming out with him in late November, with one of the guys on the DeepMind team who built a system called Dramatron. And to me, although this has nothing to do with business, this is the perfect analogy when I say generative AI needs to be your co-founder. So Dramatron was a system created by the Google DeepMind team to basically help professional writers write screenplays and scripts better. Right? Not where it wrote it for them, but where it wrote it with them. And so they designed this system, which they call Dramatron, and then they hired professional writers, and in 2 hours, got those professional writers to basically create an entire script. And actually, to be sort of more accurate, they created the plot, the title, all the scenes, all the characters, and about 2/3 of the actual script. It took them about 3.5 hours to get the whole way through, do all the final editing and stuff. But in 2 hours, they got all the way through that. And even at that point, they were far enough along that they were actually able to stage 5 of those at the largest film festival in North America. And the way that they did it is they basically hired improv writers or improv actors to read the script up till the point where it was done writing it, and then had them improv the end of the film or end of the performance, right? But this point is, like, it's not that Dramatron wrote the script for the writers. It's what Dramatron did is it basically gave those writers fast, rough drafts, fast ideas they could react to, and took a thing that would have taken weeks and got it done in 2 hours. And it's this kind of human in the loop process of quickly creating that rough draft that, to me, is the right mental model for this. And it's the mental model that we as innovation groups can lead for these other groups. And so to finish, kind of as promised, with what we always try to do when we do these hype versus reality talks, it's like, well, where's the hype and where's the reality? So to me, the hype is 100% around this. Okay, sure, these systems are so good that it's going to fully autonomously create startups. Some of you may have seen our colleagues over at Wharton just had some press in the Wall Street Journal where they had ChatGPT come up with startup ideas, and they compared those startup ideas to their student startups ideas. Carl and I are actually going to be having a conversation in a couple of weeks here about that. But the study that they did, they basically showed that the ChatGPT ideas were better than the Wharton MBA ideas. What that means is in 3 to 5 years, they will be better than the Tepper MBA ideas as well. I'm just joking, but maybe not. But the point is, but here's the real thing. Like that's a fun test. Like it's great publicity for the Wall Street Journal, and Carl's a great guy, and it was well done. But the reality is, like, that's not actually what you want to do. You don't want to go to ChatGPT and say, okay, give me an idea without much guidance, without much. What you really want is, like, your MBA students, your computer science students, your innovation teams to be iteratively talking to the LLM to come up with the right way, this sort of human in the loop, or this co-founder model. That's where this stuff is going to be really powerful, because it is an incredible tool. It is one of these amplifiers but as an amplifier where humans are in the loop doing this work with the LLMs, not doing it by itself. And so with that, I will turn it over to the last conversation before lunch with Ivo and Dave. But thank you so much. It's really been fun to see everybody today.